Welcome back to Fuck Around and Find Out. My name is Julie, and that's how I'm describing my life's journey. If I hadn't fucked around, I would have never found out. So, what are some of the things that I found out? I found out that I am stronger than I ever gave myself credit for, that I am braver than I ever thought I was. I found out what I will accept and won't accept in my life and what my worth is. Most importantly, I think I found out that it's okay to be vulnerable. That one was a hard one for me. Being vulnerable meant sharing my fears, my stories, my sadness. I didn't want anyone to feel pity for me or sad for me. And I especially didn't want anyone to worry about me. So that one was a hard one. I realize now that your true friends and your family, the ones who really love you, won't accept you just because of all the good stories and the good things that you do and the good things that you've had happen to you. That they accept you and love you and motivate you even through the sadness and the heartache, the horrible experiences that you've been through. That no matter what happens, they love you regardless. I've learned vulnerability is something that I really needed to work on and finding out who I am again, knowing what I will accept and not accept, knowing that I am worthy enough of happiness and that my world shouldn't just be about heartache and pain and all these horrible things that happen to me, that I deserve happiness. But how do you achieve that? It's by taking your experiences and learning from them, what you will do and what you won't do. And I've learned not to dwell on the past, the what if I had done this and the what if I had done that, because I had to experience what I did to be who I am today and the continuous growth that I will continue to go through to be a better person tomorrow and the next day and forever, to build on myself and to help and support other people, but not hide my pain in the meantime. I went through a period of time that I held on to, let's call it unnecessary guilt. I went through an experience and I carried that guilt with me for so long, privately, eating me up inside, not sharing it with anyone until I finally did. And it was about my mother in law's death. My mother in law was not perfect, but she loved me. That, for a fact, I knew. She loved my children. Her and my daughter had a bond so close. They were thick as thieves. They were best friends. She helped raise my daughter in her early years. My mother in law once had shared with me that one of her biggest fears was death, and not necessarily dying, but what would happen to her soul after death. She was afraid that her soul would not find heaven, that would there be somebody waiting there to show her and guide her to where she was supposed to go. That was one of her real fears. She called me one Sunday afternoon and told me that her mom had passed. We talked on the phone and I kept her company for a couple of hours. I had told her that I was not going to let my ex husband know until he got home from work that day. My ex husband couldn't know because he would have wanted to leave work early. He was only working weekends at the time, and we definitely needed the money. I told her I would wait up and let him know as soon as he got home. There was nothing he could do, anyways. And I did. I sat on the couch till 2 a.m. when he walked through the door, and I had told him that his grandma had passed. We sat there and we talked about and reminisced stories about her. We were so happy that she was able to meet all three of her great grandchildren. And I remember a story that I shared with him about the first time she saw the twins. They had been born in November and it was Christmas, so they were just barely a month old. and they were both wearing these little dinosaur pajamas. And she held them in her arms, and just the glow on her face and the happiness. That was one of my fondest memories of his grandma. She really, truly was a wonderful woman. We went to bed, and at about 7 o'clock in the morning, I got a phone call, and I didn't answer it. And a few minutes later, the phone rang again, and I thought, get your fucking ass out of bed because this has got to be an emergency. And I got up and I answered the phone, and it was my mother in law's neighbor telling me that she had had breakfast and wasn't feeling well and wanted to talk to me. So I spoke to my mother in law and asked her what was going on. She told me she wasn't feeling well. I asked her a few questions, and she said, please just come over. I need you to come over. And I hung up the phone quite annoyingly. I was annoyed. I figured she was just, upset about her mom passing and that she was in her feels. What did she want me to do? My ex-husband had just gone to bed, so I knew he wasn't going to be able to get up with the kids. I was going to have to get all 3 kids ready and make my way over there. And I was fucking annoyed. So I went into my daughter's bedroom and woke her up and told her to get dressed. And I got one of the twins dressed and put him in the stroller. And then something came over me and told me, you don't have time. You need to hurry the fuck up. So I got the other boy out of the crib and wrapped him up in a blanket and threw him in the stroller, and off we went. On the way to my mother-in-law's house, I explained to my daughter that she wasn't feeling well. And because she was in the living room in a hospital bed, I asked my daughter to take her brothers into the bedroom and keep them in there and watch TV until I assessed the situation. And I would tell her when it was okay to come out to see grandma. That's what we did. They went into the bedroom and I made my way into the living room. And when I walked into the living room, my mother-in-law had just closed her eyes. I looked up at the neighbor and asked her what is going on. And she goes, I don't know. She just kept saying she doesn't feel well. So I called out my mother-in-law's name a couple of times. No response. I tapped her. No response. I immediately went into panic. I called 911 and was told to start CPR. Check to make sure that her tongue hadn't rolled. Check her breathing. Start CPR. And I did. I climbed onto that bed and I started doing CPR. I am yelling at the 911 operator, yelling at the top of my lungs, when the fuck were the ambulance going to get here? How hard do I press down? I explained that she was a morbidly obese woman. How did I know that I was doing this right? And I was told that it didn't even matter if I broke ribs, just to press as hard as I could. And I am screaming that I needed the ambulance to get there as fast as they could. I knew that underneath my hands that I wasn't feeling anything. The woman had not given a breath. She had not moved. I knew that underneath my hands that she had passed. And as I tell you the story, I'm getting shivers down my arms because I'm still experiencing it as I'm telling you. I have never experienced anything like that in my life. I'd never seen anyone die, and I especially wasn't the one trying to save anyone who was dying. The ambulance finally showed up and they walked in the room and asked me to leave. I told them she's gone. There's nothing you can do. It's too late. They explained to me that they had a process that they had to go through, and they asked me to please leave the room. I walked into the bedroom where my children were, and I looked at my daughter and I said, your grandma is gone. And she looked at me with her little eyes and said, I know, Mommy. And how do you know, baby girl? She goes, Mom, you wouldn't have been screaming as loud as you were for as long as you had if something bad hadn't happened. She was so little. I wasn't even sure she understood what death was. She lost her best friend that day. She lost her grandma that day. And now I had to call my ex-husband and let him know. And I called the house, and the phone rang, no answer. I knew that he was dead asleep. I called again and no answer. And I called and I called and I called until he finally answered the phone. And I said to him that his mom was very, very ill and that he needed to get here as fast as possible. I met him in the hallway and he looked at me and said, "My mom is dead." And the words couldn't even come out of my mouth. I just nodded. And he said, "I know. The ambulance got here before me." He goes, "I knew as I walked up to the building." Now, what he didn't know was that she had called me that morning. What he didn't know at that time was that I had tried to save her. I couldn't find the words. I had a tremendous amount of guilt that came over me. What if I had answered the phone the first time she called? What if I had ran over there faster than I did? What if I hadn't called her name and started CPR right away? What if, what if, what if? It's my fault that she's dead. He had just lost his grandmother. And 12 hours later, he lost his mom. My kids had lost their grandmother. And it was my fault. That night I went to bed, sad, overwhelmed, and feeling a tremendous amount of guilt. And as we laid there in bed, I told my ex-husband what had happened. He was distraught with losing two of the most important women in his life. And he said, "You did everything you could." I went to bed with those words in my head. You did everything you could. But did I? I didn't feel I had. I could have done better. In the middle of the night, I felt the bed shift, and I opened up my eyes. And from the corner of my eye, I saw a woman standing there. I saw my mother-in-law. And I was so scared that I closed my eyes and opened them back up, and she wasn't there anymore. But I heard the words, "I'm okay. I'm with my mom." And I laid there and I thought, okay, this woman was so afraid of her soul not finding heaven and not knowing where to go that maybe this was supposed to happen this way. Her mom had just passed and she waited for her to take her to heaven. I was justifying it. And then I felt guilty that I was justifying her death. I was feeling guilty about that. Julie, now you're just justifying it. Well, the next few days were a whirlwind. Getting the kids suits and my daughter a dress and prepping for a funeral. I didn't have time to think anymore. I was just doing. I was walking around feeling guilty, but not processing what really had happened. I will say that something changed in my ex-husband. When he would walk through the door, his eyes were different. His demeanor was different. And I thought, he blames me. He's blaming me. He's not telling me, but it's my fault. I carried that burden for a very long time. One day I finally broke down and apologized to my ex-husband for not saving his mom. And that was the day that he kind of gave me a sense of relief. And he said, "You realize you did everything you could, and that I don't blame you for her death. I don't blame you." I didn't realize how much I really needed to hear those words. Because I did. things in our relationship changed. He had called me one day and said that he just couldn't function at work anymore. He had finally found a full-time job. He'd only been there for a few weeks. And he said, I can't. I need to take time off again. And he did. I thought that he was going to need just a few weeks to kind of, feel better, process, be okay. That wasn't the case. He ended up taking 2 years off work. And that turned out to be 2 of the hardest years, and 2 years that changed our relationship forever. I'm going to share that story in a future episode. But what I wanted to share with you today is that we carry guilt that we need to let go of, that we need to talk about, that shitty things happen. And sometimes it's not your fault. And even if it is your fault, owning it, talking about it, and learning from it. We're human. It's okay to make mistakes. It's not okay to continuously make the same mistake, especially when someone's pointed it out to you. And had I shared how I felt about my mother-in-law's death and the guilt that I felt, had I had that conversation with him a little bit sooner, maybe I wouldn't have struggled so much. Maybe it wouldn't have been so hard. The day that she was buried was probably one of the hardest days of my life. Seeing her entire family around the casket and me standing there thinking, I could have done something. That is a lot of burden for one person to carry. I know now that there is really nothing I could have done. There is nothing. But I try to remind my children as much as possible stories about her and how much she loved them. I remind my daughter about stories, things that she did even if I didn't like it, like giving her cheesies at such a young age, and my daughter coming home with the evidence around her fingernails. And at the time, I would get really upset with my mother-in-law about it. But now I laugh, and I'm glad that she fed my daughter cheesies. We wish that things sometimes were different. The truth of the matter is, everything's supposed to happen the way it's supposed to happen. We may not see it at the time, but when you look back, you think, okay, God had a plan. We may not always understand it, but I needed to accept it. So here it is. Continue to work on yourself and take your experiences and learn from them. Don't carry around guilt. If you've done something wrong, ask for forgiveness. If it is unnecessary guilt you're carrying, work through it. Talk to someone. And really continue to grow as a person and understand that your past is not who you are, and that your past teaches you. And if you're willing to look at it and look at the lessons that it gives you, that you could touch other people and be better versions of yourself. I hope the story helps someone understand that everyone's going through something, and that we've all gone through some horrible, shitty things in our life. So be kind to one another and be kind to yourself. If you want to continue on this journey with me, hit the subscribe, hit the like, and I'll see you next time.